Yes, guys, welcome back to the West Coast Eagles special, my draft analysis, list assessment, whatever you want to call it. I want to get one of these videos out for all of the AFL clubs leading up to the 2024 draft, but I've started with the West Coast Eagles because of the departure of Adam Simpson. I think it's a pretty good time to take stock of, things that have happened in the past with West Coast's list, what they're going to do for the future, some of the strategies and philosophies leaning into all of that kind of stuff. So I think I want to start with, the Adam Simpson coaching philosophies, how that's kind of changed. We'll kind of do a bit of a walk through that from 2018 when they won the flag and then kind of transition into where they're going in the future because I think a lot has changed. I think it's been painted as a bit of a basket case and an ad hoc experiment going back from that kind of hasn't had any direction. But I think since about 2022, there has been a bit of a change in game style, philosophy, and the list management decisions have been made around that. So we're not absolute ground zero in the rebuild. I think, a little bit of the foundations, I guess, have been laid there. So I want to take you to the Brisbane Lions, who, in somewhat of a similar situation to West Coast, back in 2017, 2018, they really bottomed out. They had a wooden spoon in 17, and then I think they were bottom 4 in 2018. And they began this rebuild around the idea of a forward half game, an idea of a game style that's become very common in the AFL. We've seen Melbourne win premierships with that model, generating those inside 50s, giving yourself a lot of scoring opportunities, a lot of opportunity to win the ball back high and then score off those opportunities. Brisbane went into the draft between 2017 and sort of now with a strategy around that. They used their high picks on those really skillful, high-end, contest-winning midfielders, players like Cam Rayner, like Zach Bailey that can win contests forward of the ball. They're powerful, dynamic, and can hit the scoreboard. They also, they did do some trading around that time too. They got in Lachie Neale, obviously a Brownlow medalist, a gun player, someone that they could rely on to win contests in the middle of the ground and get them into that forward half. Josh Dunkley was another. And then they sort of used their later picks, their rookie picks on key position players a lot of the time. They did a few trades there with players like Joe Danaher, but, Darcy Fort, Harris Andrews, Marcus Adams, a lot of that back line that we see now came from later picks in the draft, so they didn't have to use up a lot of currency for those kind of players. And we can see that West Coast have grabbed onto that model in some ways. And it starts around the 2022 draft when the writing was really starting to become on the wall for West Coast as to this, bottoming out nature of the team. There was really no chance of a premiership at that point, and they turned to the draft to look for those contest winners that could get them into the forward half. And Adam Simpson has spoken publicly about this game style shift. We know Adam Simpson back in 2018, he was more of an uncontested possession coach. He liked to control the ball. He liked to defend with holding onto the ball and just keep the ball off the opposition, play that uncontested game and have a lot of control with possession. Now, in the 2022 draft, they moved away from those types of players that were, ball retention type players, kickers, outside wingers, those types of players, and they went for big-bodied inside midfielders that could get them up the ground. Ruben Jinby came in with their first pick in 2022, who's a 190-centimetre bull of a midfielder. They also drafted Elijah Hewitt in that same draft, a contested forward of centre midfielder. And they also looked for a dominant ruck in that draft as well and picked up Harry Barnett, the 203-centimetre player, with pick 23. They also traded in that off-season, they also traded for Matt Flynn as another ruck option, probably a more mature age player and someone that could play straight away for them, and Tyler Brockman, who was going to be a pesky sort of forward pressure player inside forward 50, could hit the scoreboard and also win contests inside the 50. 2023, they went for more contested midfielders. Obviously, Harley Reid was a best available player, but he fits that model of being able to get you up the ground, get you territory from the center of the ground. They also drafted a key position forward there in Archer Reid, who's developing at the moment in the Waffle. And then they also got Clay Hall with one of their later picks, another contested big-bodied midfielder at 190 centimetres as well. So, how can we see this in a practical sense? If we look to their stats between 2023 and 2024, when they've really started to change this dynamic with their game style, if we just first look at their forward half scoring, so they've improved their forward half scoring in 2024 by 4 points per game. Again, they're not high up the list of teams from the forward half game style because they're not good enough at it at this stage, but they're improving their own profile, ticking that over in the right direction. If you look at their contested possession profile from 2023 to 2024, they've improved that by 11 contested possession per game. So that's ticking in the right direction as well. And their uncontested possession profile has gone down by -40 from 2023 to 2024. Now, there's problems in that inherently in the fact that you're not controlling possession enough, but they are switching to this game style and the signs are there. And they've developed it around this draft profile of going for big, contested midfielders. And we look at even some of the players that were drafted well before this shift. You know, Elliot Yeo is now a top 10 clearance player. He's a top 10 contested possession player as he's been able to get fit, get his body right this season. Tim Kelly's tracking really well in that area as well. And these two players are really leading that next brigade of midfielders. Harley Reid sits pretty high for a first-year player in contested possession and clearance. And Ruben Jinby's tracking pretty well as a second-year player as well. So those are the good signs and the philosophical changes that West Coast have implemented over this time that are driving them forward. And we're not starting from ground zero in 2024. We've had a couple of off seasons to get this ticking in the right direction. So with that being said, around the new profile, the new style of game that West Coast Eagles have implemented and what they want to do going forward with this list build, we've got to talk about the older statesmen, some of the players that their future could be up at the West Coast Eagles come season's end. We've had the new caretaker coach come in, and he's already dropped a few of these guys to the waffle. The first one that I want to start with, not a player that's been dropped this week. He was still in the latest team. It's Alex Witherton. He's played 117 games of AFL footy. He's 26 years of age. So he's not a guy that you need to be retiring based on age, but his contract is up at the end of 2024. And I just don't know what Alex Witherton offers this next iteration of West Coast Eagles, to be honest. He's an attacking sort of half-back player. He's a bit of a liability defensively. He's not that great with ball in hand. Probably the main compliment I can pay to Alex Witherton is he's a pretty nice size. He's nearly, hitting 190 centimetres, so he can probably play on one of those awkward medium-type forwards, but does he actually do that much defensively? I'm not sure. I'd love to hear West Coast Eagles' opinion on Alex Witherton, but I'm not a massive fan of him, and I think he's one that they could delist come season's end. The next one on my list is Andrew Gaff, who, has to go down as a club legend. He's played 278 games. He's now 32 years of age, so he's getting on a little bit. Certainly, you don't have to retire players at that age, but Andrew Gaff's had a tough season in 2024. He's barely played a game of senior football. He's an unrestricted free agent at the end of 2024. Could you get anything for Andrew Gaff? I don't know. Would any other club really want to take Andrew Gaff off your hands? I think you just cut Gaff at the end of the season. You sort of begin to have this cultural rebuild as well. You get some of these guys from the older brigade, the older system, the older style of game off your list. I think Andrew Gaff sort of represents an older school style of footballer, someone that doesn't really particularly have any attributes. He's a pretty good footballer. At the peak of his powers, he was a great power runner and he was a guy that could move you up the field. But he's declined a lot. He's lost that little bit of extra speed. And I think in the modern game, it just doesn't suit him, and it certainly doesn't suit this next iteration of West Coast Eagles that wants to push forward as a big contest and clearance powerhouse. Fitting in perfectly with Andrew Gaff, I think Dom Sheed fits into that same group. He's only 29 years of age, so not one that you really want to retire. His contract's up in 2025. Do I think they'll be ruthless enough to cut him? I don't know. I think they should, though. I think they should. He was omitted this week by the caretaker coach. He's only played 8 games this season, and I just don't think he has a lot to offer. With some of the older guys that are still on the list that can help the next generation, Dom Sheed has to go at season's end for me. We've also got Jamie Cripps, and this one feels a little bit harsh, I guess. He's 32 years of age. He's played 245 games. Another one that's been... I think fans will probably have the most difficult time with Cripps because he has played some good footy in 2024. His contract is up in 2025, and I think he's another one that you could move on, and he doesn't really offer a lot moving forward. Jack Darling, I think he just goes, doesn't he? 293 games. He's been All-Australian, been a leading goal kicker. He was dropped last week by the caretaker coach, and his contract is up in 2025. He's maybe someone that is an outside chance that another club could want his services, and you might be able to get something, but I think it'd be fairly minimal. I think you move Jack Darling on. Again, the cultural rebuild has to happen. You have to start moving some of these guys on. You have to be ruthless with your rebuild. I don't want to cut the absolute life out of the club so they've, lost their identity completely. But I think with the new forwards emerging with Waterman, with Allen, I don't think you need Jack Darling in there anymore. The next thing I want to do here, so we've kind of talked about the players that need to go out of the side at season's end, that need to kind of be a part of this list evolution. Let's talk about the guys that have probably been overlooked a little bit by Adam Simpson. They've played too much waffle football. They haven't really been given a chance at AFL level. And I think 2024 was the year that they should have been starting to at least get some games into them. I think Jai Culley is the one that stands out the most. At waffle level, he is the best player on the field. He stands out at that level with his power, with his forward craft, and with his overhead marking. He's only 21 years of age, and he can certainly be a big part of this midfield and this kind of, iteration of forward half contest winners. I think Jai Culley fits that profile perfectly. Maybe the only argument that you could make about Jai Culley is a little bit of a similar type to what they've drafted high in the national draft. Jimby, Hewitt, Reid, those types of players. And you've still got Yo and Kelly as other big-bodied midfielders. So Culley sort of is one of the weaker ones of that type of player. But I think Culley offers so much more from an offensive point of view. You can push him inside forward 50, and he's a really difficult matchup because of his aerial ability. I've watched his last 3 to 4 games at waffle level, and he stands out so much at that level. He's just so much more powerful. His body looks, more hardened than the other players at waffle level. And he's just been performing fantastic. He's had 25 touches per week. He's kicked goals, hit the scoreboard regularly. So I love Culley as a player, and I think he deserves to be getting more appearances in this first team. Ryan Marich is the other one. Not one that's been left out of the team regularly by Adam Simpson, but he has been a bit of a whipping boy, been dropped to the waffle and that sort of thing. He's 20 years of age and can certainly fit into that third tall role. I think he can be one of the best players in the AFL at either that third tall role or as a bit of an oversized winger that can run the logos, be an outlet from defensive 50 and push you up the ground. Ryan Marich needs to get more time. Funnily enough, both of those players are mid-season draft pick number 1. So we'll move on to Zane True. He was one that got called up by the new coach last week. As far as talent goes, I'm not sure Zane True is the future for West Coast, but I certainly think he's one that you can get games into in the back half of 2024. He could be there as a bit of a top-up player for 2025 as you get some more higher draft picks, some highly talented players. Is he going to get into a contested midfield lineup that has Jimby, Hewitt, Reid, Culley? He's probably the bottom of that list, but he can certainly be someone that comes in when there's an injury. He can, play off the bench at times and be the 4th or 5th mid. So I think he's useful. 22 years of age, so a better player from that age profile point of view. Harry Barnett, they've got to start getting some more games into this guy. At the moment, they've favoured Bailey Williams over him in the seniors, and he hasn't even been playing as the number 1 ruck in the waffle as they've gone with Livingston. So that's an interesting one. Obviously, that's a little bit due to positional flexibility. So you've got Harry Barnett's a player that can push forward, and he can play as a forward where Livingston can't. But what that does is it caps Harry Barnett's development, I guess, in the bottom level, so he can come up and play AFL. I think Harry Barnett has a bigger ceiling than a Williams or a Livingston, so they need to start getting games into him. We'll talk about the 2025 lineup or the back half of 2024 lineup or predicted lineups that we can go with. We've also got Brockman, who's played a lot of waffle. That's been for different reasons. I think he's had some behavioural stuff, some incidents off the field, but I think Brockman's a really good small forward. Part of this attacking press that they'll need to implement in the forward half of the ground, and another guy that hits the scoreboard and wins contests. They traded him from Hawthorn for a reason, and I think he's a really good player. The other one that I think could be getting more game time in the seniors is Harvey Johnson. He's 19 years of age. He was a pick 49 back a couple of years ago. And I just think he offers something a little bit different as a sort of high half forward. He's a little bit more of an outside player and a good ball user, less of a bull. So I think they still do need to start getting some games into players like that, guys that can kick the ball inside 50 and hit up a target when you need to have a little bit more control on the game. So Harvey Johnson comes into it there. We'll now move on to the 2025 lineup and how I think this team should begin to look, at least in the back half of 2024 going into 2025, and we'll include some of the long-term injured players in this as well. So based on everything I've said there, the rebuild, the change in philosophy, the game style, and how they've gone to the draft and how they want to build this team and how they want to play. We'll look at the 2025, predicted lineup, and even the back half of 2024, what we'd like to see going forward for the West Coast Eagles. Sort of do a bit of a possible team lineup here. I think you've got to be playing the two rucks in 2025, Bailey Williams and Harry Barnett. Barnett just needs to get that development into him. I think he's a really, can be a really high production ruck. He just hasn't had that ability to be able to do it even at waffle level with Livingston playing as the number one ruck. So Barnett needs to get some games into him so he can lead the line for the Eagles. The midfield, starting midfield centre bounce, I think it's going to be Elliot Yeo, Harley Reid, Ruben Jinby. As I said with Yeo, he's a top 10 player in the competition, in my opinion. He's top 10 for clearances. He's top 10 for contested possession. Yeah, he's lost a little bit of that spread and that running ability on the outside and the athleticism that he had because of his body, because of his injuries, but he's still got a lot to offer this West Coast team. He's their best player at the moment. I don't think he's going to be in the next premiership team. I think they'll eventually phase him out as Harley Reid and Ruben Jinby and Elijah Hewitt start to lead this team, but he certainly has a lot to offer in 2025. Harley Reid's obviously going to be there. He's an absolute superstar in the making. He doesn't have the tank to be able to, run out games and get 30 touches a week. That's what he has to develop over the next couple of seasons. But what he's done in his 14 games has been brilliant. Partnering up with him will be Ruben Jinby in that centre circle. So this midfield, it is a little bit oversized. All the guys are around the 190 centimetre mark there in that starting centre circle. But I think you'll look to the draft to get somebody with a bit more agility and maybe the foot skills, the high-end foot skills that can kind of, retain the ball and hit some targets as well down the future. Elijah Hewitt is a little bit of the wild card because he's been injured for most of the 2024 season. So I think he's got a big part to play, particularly as that forward of centre, really damaging midfielder that can, play a bit of high half forward, play a bit of midfield time and help these guys out. Tim Kelly still has a role to play in the short term, I think, for this team, as does Jai Cully for the long term. I think Jai Cully is an excellent player. I think he can play more of that, again, that high half forward, create a mismatch inside forward 50 and then run through the midfield as well. His overhead marking skills are fantastic. Then you've got sort of depth players, I would say, in Zane True and Luke Edwards. Luke Edwards has played 10 AFL games this season, so he's obviously rated. We probably need to see a little bit more if he's going to be a real, gun of the competition, but I think we can see that. He can be a bit of a depth player over the next couple of seasons, and we can get more of a look. Zane True, probably just more of a depth player at this point. He doesn't have that high-end pedigree. He wasn't a high draft pick or anything like that. Wings, I think it's pretty simple. It's Ryan Marich and Jaden Hunt. Jaden Hunt's been really good for this team as a bit of a top-up player, and Ryan Marich, I don't think you play him as the third tall because I think you play Jack Hutchinson there, who will move on to now. I think the forward line, and particularly the talls, kind of just pick themselves. You've got Oscar Allen, who's a superstar really. Jake Waterman, who's playing like a superstar, although not a high pedigree pick, but pick 77 back in 2016. He's been fantastic this season. So the other one is Jack Hutchinson, who's that mid-season draft prospect. I think he's the best option as a third tall. I think Marich is more suited to that wing role, so Hutchinson can play as the third tall. And then you've got your smalls in Noah Long, who's been injured most of this season. You've got Tyler Brockman, who's he's a high-end small forward. And then you can play someone like a Jack Petruccelli or a Jai Cully as that forward that can sort of come up to stoppage and help out with the clearance profile. Players that could be sitting on the bench here, you've got Jermaine Jones, Luke Edwards, Harvey Johnson, Tyrell Dewar. But they're sort of those half 40 types, depth players. We haven't seen enough of them, a lot of those guys at AFL level, to really make a call. The defenders, you've got McGovern, you've got Barras. At 32 and 29 years of age, obviously that's going to be a priority to hit the draft and get some more key defenders in to replace those guys in the long term. But they'll certainly be playing there. It's just about whether they can get their bodies right to be able to play enough games to help out this young Eagles side. I think you've got Josh Rotham and Callum Jamison, who are probably fighting for that next tall lockdown defender role. I think Jamison's really promising. I've liked what he's done in the waffle this season, albeit I think he has an injury at the moment, so won't be able to do much for now. But for 2025, I think he's probably a priority that I'd like to see get some games into. And then you've got your smalls. I think Brady Hoff's done a really good job. He was taken in that 2021 draft. He's done a really good job at sort of deploying himself as a defender, being able to lock down on the best small forwards or medium forwards in the competition, and then, being pretty good with ball in hand. I don't think he's an elite ball user, but he does pretty well on the offensive stuff. I think Kobe Bergiel needs to get into this team a little bit more. He's had some pretty good form in the waffle. He was a pick 29 back in 2022. He's played more of a wing half forward, but I think he could play half back, be a bit of an outlet for this team, albeit that they're going to be that forward half team, so they probably don't have to have a huge profile off half back, albeit you need some control off the half back and you need some ability to be able to move the ball from back end to front end. And the other one is Liam Duggan, the captain. He's just going to be there as that, focal point in defense. He sits off the back of the stoppage, sort of helps with the ball movement, helps with directing the young guys, I guess, around the ball. And he's just there for leadership, really. 28 years of age. He's played 175 games. And yeah, he's just a good, solid player, is Liam Duggan. So now we've got to focus on the draft with all of that being said. So we've got to take all of that stuff into consideration about what they've done in recent drafts, how they're trying to build this list profile and their game style, and it's all a part of that picture that they need to consider. So for West Coast, getting more picks inside the top 20 is all about leveraging that pick 3 and finding a club that can use that pick 3 to their advantage. So I look at the top 3 players, and I think the one guy that teams are going to want specifically as part of their list build is Josh Smiley. And the one team that stands out to me that would want Josh Smiley is Hawthorn. Now, they've had links to Smiley. He's part of that Eastern Rangers team. He's trained with Hawthorn in the off-season, and he's even played games with Box Hill. It's no secret, really, that Hawthorn really rate Josh Smiley, and he would be the perfect replacement for Connor Nash. So Smiley is definitely a player that Hawthorn could want to go after. Hawthorn currently hold picks 6 and 27 in the national draft, so they don't have exactly what West Coast would be after. But could they trade that pick 6 to get maybe 2 picks inside the top 20, maybe a pick 10 and a pick 15, that they could then trade onto West Coast for that pick 3 to get Smiley? I think that's the question that West Coast have to ask themselves. Then you've got to talk about who West Coast should be targeting in this draft. We've got to talk about the 2 options. We've got to talk about if it stands as it is with pick 3 and pick 23, and then we've got to talk about the possibility that they might have, say, pick 10, pick 15, and pick 23, something like that. So the players I think West Coast really need to be going after, the first one is Sid Draper. If they have a really high-end pick inside that top 5, I think they have to take Sid Draper. He's a wonderful clearance player. He's got endurance, he's got burst out of the stoppage, he's got that explosiveness, and he can also deliver the ball on a platter inside forward 50, which is going to complement this West Coast midfield with Reed, with Ginby. I think Draper would be the perfect third wheel to that, tandem combination that they've got going on. Draper has that extra agility that, say, a Ginby doesn't have. Reed probably does have it, but, agility is not something that you can have too much of. So I love that mix. I love the idea of them getting Draper, but that would be the high pick option if they had a pick inside the top 5 or 6, I would say. The next one that West Coast need to be looking at more so if they have, 2 to 3 picks inside the top 20, say if they're pushed back and they trade their pick 3, they really have to be looking at Taj Houghton, who was looking like a top 10 pick until he did his knee back in round 4. He hit the start of this season better than anyone. He had regular 30-touch games and multiple goals. He's a real smooth-moving midfielder, a real clever type player. He drifts into pockets of space, just seems to find areas where he can pick up the ball, deliver inside 50 or kick goals. He's great overhead for his, more like 180 centimetre style. So he can go forward, he can hit the scoreboard. But more importantly, he's a real competitor with that outside polish that he possesses. And I think, again, you talk about that midfield mix with having those big bullocking players. Taj Houghton would be a great sort of complementary player to that midfield mix, I think, and someone that has positional flexibility as well. I think you could start someone like a Taj Houghton off half back even. He could pick up, get a lot of the ball, sort of ease his way into the AFL level before becoming a fully fledged midfielder. The other one is Murphy Reid, who has had a magnificent national championships. He's another one that has that outside polish, but he also has the grunt of the inside players. I think he complements the forward half game, and he's someone for West Coast that could come in and deliver the ball inside forward 50. He's a smart player. He's been compared to Steele Sidebottom. I think he's a bit like Jack Sinclair as well. So another one that you could roll off half back when he first started his career and then move him into the midfield. He finds the ball with ease. He's a smart player. He's a polished player, and he's someone, again, that just contrasts beautifully with what they already have. I think Reid's form warrants a top 10 selection, so he would be one that, if they got pushed back to around that number 10 mark, they'd have to be considering Murphy Reid. They'd have to be considering Taj Houghton. The last one on the list, who's probably more like a top 15 pick, again, one that if they were able to get their hands on 2 picks, they could grab 2 of these guys, which would just complement the side beautifully. Xavier Lindsay, he just came off a 30-touch game for Vic Country. He was amazing in that big game against Vic Metro. Smooth moving. He takes the ball really deep. He progresses you up the field. He's got a beautiful left foot kick that he often hits those nice corridor kicks with. So he's going to help with your scoring profile off half back, which is still important. And then even in that forward half game style where you win the ball back high up the field, it's important to have those guys that can just, have that surgical kicking inside forward 50. And Xavier Lindsay has that. He's also really tough. We saw some of those big physical contests that he had. So he fits what West Coast are trying to do, and he also fits the fact that he's more of a pick between 10 and 20 rather than a top 10 option, with which West Coast might get pushed back into. I think the other type of player that West Coast really need in this rebuild is a key position defender, someone to replace McGovern and Tom Barrass as they age out of this side. I think there's 3 guys sitting there. One of them is going to be only a top 5 pick option, and the other 2 are more gettable for West Coast. So you've got Luke Traynor sitting there, who's the complete package, defensive one-on-one ability, and he's also a distributor. He's an interceptor. He does everything. Then you've got Harry O'Farrell, who's more of a between 10 and 30 type pick, as is Noah Mraz. Harry O'Farrell and Noah Mraz, very similar type players. They both made appearances with the AFL Academy side, so they have that pedigree. They're well respected in this year's draft. They're not as good with ball in hand as Luke Traynor. They can't sort of, hit corridor kicks, hit those outlet kicks, but what they can do is they can lock down on the best defender. They're both pushing 200 centimeters. They have closing speed. They have one-on-one capabilities. And I just think they would be, they're probably, if you compare them to someone in the AFL, the types of things that they do, it's a Sam Taylor, it's a Buckley, those GWS types. So modern day defenders, not the best distributors, but perfect in a one-on-one situation, which is the main thing that you want when you're drafting a defender. So that is my draft recap. I think, to summarize that, it's a little bit complicated with what they can do with the picks, but I think they've got to be trying to split this so that they can get 3, maybe even 4 picks inside the top 30. I've kind of floated that Hawthorn idea. Fremantle probably have the best pick options, but I can't see Fremantle wanting to get up to that pick 3. So I think that kind of takes them out of it. Maybe Hawthorn can do a bit of a deal with Fremantle, and then that leads on to West Coast being able to facilitate a deal with Hawthorn. But that's how I think they should go. Those are the players that I think West Coast need to be targeting in this draft to play into this whole narrative about the forward half game, the changing strategy of West Coast going into the 2025 season. So that is a wrap for my West Coast sort of list assessment, draft preview, what I think West Coast could be doing in this 2024 draft. I think this is a great opportunity to tell me what you guys think as West Coast fans. For my assessment of things, if you agree with my kind of, best 22 and what West Coast should be targeting in this year's draft. That's a wrap for this video, guys, and I'll see you next time.